Hey everyone, this is PanbanRichard presenting to you AC Radio at abyssalchronicles.com, where Tales is our life. This episode is for Sunday, October 14th, 2018, as I'm joined here by AC Radio co-host DimensionSlip and AC owner Abby, who is currently in the hospital right now, so she may be dropping in and out on occasion, so that's going to be your heads up about that. And essentially, we're going to be talking about two different topics here. So, first one is going to be related to a particular anime that I hold dear to my heart a little bit. It's a little bit of a guilty pleasure, known as the Eternia Anime. We'll be recapping the entire first episode. And after that, we'll be talking about a very polarizing scene if you've ever played Tales of the Abyss, considering that it's also its 12th anniversary for its localization launch, which was around October. Actually, it was October 10th, 2006. So we'll be talking about the scene that occurred in Akzeriuth. So that'll be a spoiler alert for those who haven't played Abyss ahead of time. So, with that said, talking about the Eternia anime, out of curiosity, Abby, I don't know if you watched the whole show, but what did you think about the show out of curiosity?
Oh, I did watch the whole show, but that was years ago, where I actually sat down and completed the whole thing. All in all, the only thing that I didn't really like about it is the art. But then again, that was a really long time ago, so I guess that's fine. But in terms of the content, the story, I mean, it's I like the fact that it was more of a spin-off than an actual adaptation of what was happening in the game, because it gave us new content, something to look forward to, but that's not in the game, something you're not expecting. However, I guess it was a little bit, how do I say this? I sort of remember a lot of ecchi parts. That I did not expect.
I think that sounds about right. Yeah.
I did not expect that from a Tales anime.
Well, it was the first adaptation of the entire franchise. Before we get into its background, Slip, you only watched the one episode that we're recapping right now. Out of curiosity, what was an overall impression that you got from watching that first episode, considering that you went into the series in 2013, I believe?
Yeah. So that's kind of my first exposure to how Eternia is, besides crossover games. So I would say, in a very boring word, it's interesting, to say the least of it. And
in what way?
And kind of nostalgic, because it's so early, 20, very very old, early 2000 anime. So it's yeah, this is very old. That's one thing. And I got to agree with what Abby said about the art. It was, oh gosh, I'm just saying interesting to be polite, but God, it's awful.
All right, to kind of put into words exactly why we're sort of a little bit, I guess for lack of a better term, sticking with the term interesting, is because this anime is the first anime adaptation we had in the franchise. To kind of go over its background, the Japanese release of Tales of Eternia was in the year 2000, November 30, 2000, and the anime was ran on television for 13 episodes from January 8, 2001 to March 26, 2001. So the release window between the game and the anime were very relatively close together. And a big part of why that anime existed was to advertise to viewers that, hey, this is a new anime about our new Tales of game that's taking a lot of steps in the linear motion battle system. Here's a little bit of a taste as to how this game is presented to the viewers. And it's kind of it does have elements of the game into it that I kind of appreciate personally. And according to Anime News Network, the anime had a slot every Monday at 6:30 p.m.
Oh, that's a really good slot. Huh.
Yeah. After
It's not
school slot.
yes. It's not like super late in the evening where most anime air nowadays. But yeah, um, yeah, I think that was an interesting step on their end.
Yes, and it was also animated by Zebic, which was a subsidiary group of IG Port, which was also an extension of Production IG. So there was a lot of extensions further from Zebic, and I can't remember any anime that they did off the top of my head, but I'll have it in the show notes once we progress through the episode here. So the reason why we say interesting is because it's that anime that is from that odd transition from the early to mid 90s anime to early to mid 2000s anime. And I use that description because there are a lot of interesting tropes that occur throughout the show, and we'll be recapping that as we go through the first episode here. So, without further ado, let's go on with the first episode of Tales of Eternia, the anime. We start off with an opening narration discussing the war between Celestia and Inferior from history's past and a shot of our four heroes. We are then introduced to the show's opening, Sora ni Kakeru Hashi, by Masami Okui. One thing that I really like about this song is that, I have a bit of a soft spot for it because I used it for one of my AMVs back when I was still a Tales of newbie and whatnot. And a bigger thing that I discovered last year was an acoustic cover by the same artist. So that was kind of a pleasant surprise for me to see personally with the opening. And the opening embodies everything about early 90s openings. Like, you see the characters running across the field and tumbling down it, and they all laugh, giggle, 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 ha ha ha. There's a shot about the female character and their glowing body, and the group shot of the major characters right at the end. It's, like I said, it's very old school.
Yeah, it just takes me back to that time period.
Yeah, it's definitely very old school, and you would think that it's definitely tropes that are completely out of place if you consider modern anime shows nowadays, but there's a bit of an old school charm that comes to the opening because it has all those particular tropes, but it wouldn't really exist nowadays in 2018.
Ah, yes, that's why I also said Wild Good was kind of nostalgic because of those elements, because I haven't watched kind of really old anime lately, so it took me back.
Yeah, so we then see a flashback of the start of the game where the lead male and female characters, Reed and Farah, tempt fate about nothing crashing from Celestia to their homeland Inferior, and surprise, something does, as you would. Then all of a sudden, the pink-haired girl Meredy snaps Farah out of her dream, and the two of them reminisce about when Farah first met Meredy from said thing falling from the sky. Foreign Melnix language included. For those who don't know, Melnix is the language that was introduced in Eternia that is Meredy's native tongue, and all the characters have this item in their ear known as an Or's earring that this anime was able to have shown on the character art themselves. So it's kind of cool to see, but you don't really see it as much in the game itself outside of just seeing the image of the item. So Keel is investigating some nearby ruins, and Reed is lounging around as usual. They comment on the Grand Fall, the point where both Celestia and Inferior collide with each other, which is why they're on a journey to prevent that from happening. To those who haven't played Eternia, all of these events are occurring before transitioning to Disc 2, and it's explained better in the source material. Suddenly, we are introduced to three masked figures who are monitoring our heroes, with a particular interest in Meredy, also noting the Kramos of fire, water, and wind accompanying them. Kramos are basically Eternia's summon spirits, nothing more. And our not villains are going to cause some shenanigans with said cast. I mean, it's so obvious they're villains, but again, it's still like a time that in early animes they show like the shadowy figures in the background all discussing about what to do with the main cast. So back to our hero team, we notice a glimpse shot of a person with blue hair who appears to be monitoring them in hiding. The group decides to prepare dinner as Farah delegates tasks, with Reed slightly distracted that they might be watched. He throws a rock towards a suspicious bush, but shrugs it off after there was no response. But we as the viewers see that it was caught by said blue-haired stalker. Suddenly conflict! The group is out of dried egg bear meat, and guess who ate it? Mr. Potbelly Herschel. Reed's gimmick of eating everything in sight is pretty much like how it's established in the side games as well, and they firmly establish it.
Yeah,
here.
that was such a good establishing character moment.
That's one of my favorite things about Reed, to be honest.
Yeah.
He just eats
Yes,
everything. He's such the hunter.
My first exposure to Reed was in Radiant Mythology, and yeah, he also gave that impression when you first meet him. Just eats everything.
It was kind of cool too, because I did replay Radiant Mythology a little bit to get some footage for the Recollection series, and I ran into the skit where Reed sniffed like bread out of nowhere, and his super sniffing sense found that it was coming from Senno's like bread basket, and Senna was like freaked. I was like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "Oh, you got some great bread. Can I have some?" Just asking so casually because he's just that much of a hungry hunter, literally.
And he doesn't get fat.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Wait, he doesn't like that guy's metabolism. He just hunts all day and just eats whatever he wants, and nothing happens to him, literally. So, where was I here? Cut this out, please. So the group is out of... Okay, where was I? Excuse me. Now uncut. Farah attempts to take Reed down in a slight anger with the shakiest camera angles I've ever seen in anime for quite some time. I mean, the camera was shaking all over the place. It was a little bit nauseating for me. And it ended up with the cliched male lead on top of female character and that awkward moment that happens in the middle of it. Yep.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about and what everybody else is talking about when we bring this up.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing I did not expect from a Tales anime, because I think I watched Fantasia first before I watched the Eternia adaptation. So you can see the light years of difference from the two.
Yeah. I mean, to be specific, the Fantasia OVA came out in 2004, which was 3 years after this anime. So they definitely took some cues and were having that, again, transition from the early 90s to the mid 2000s style of anime. So with that said, we see a singing female bard up on a tree as Reed was delegated with the task of hunting down food because of his mishap of being very hungry. He finds a wolf who runs up the tree that our bard was sitting on, but Reed was able to knock it off the tree real quickly. He's about to finish it off until the bard lands on Reed's face. Glutes first. Y'all know how that is. So it's not even like 5 minutes that we ran into this trope not once but twice.
Yeah.
Like, we should count this. We should like make a count per episode.
Oh yes.
Oh.
For the next episode.
Cliche counter.
Yep. These things happen. I swear there will be more than 20.
Sounds like a drinking game ready to happen. Yeah. But with that aside, I'm just like the wolf's about to attack the bard and we get a commercial bumper. So I kind of missed the commercial bumpers because it's kind of, again, that old school charm, and honestly it reminds me of how great some other anime had them, like particularly Gurren Lagann having some of the best ones in my opinion. But back from the commercial, Reed pushes the bard off and continues to combat the wolf and manages to kill it. And then we go back to the rest of our heroes and their hunger starts to get the better of them while they wait for Reed. So Farah decides to hunt as well. And then once we go back to Reed, who is capturing his prey, the bard introduces herself as Korina Solgent. She's voiced by Yui Horii, who also voiced Chie in Persona 4.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, so she kind of had a bit of a start here from bard to, well, maybe that's how she got influenced and became like a meat eater in Chie. But She states that her dream is to write a poem that'll be remembered throughout history. She's quite the energetic character, and for those who are following along, she is anime exclusive. She does not show up in the game at all. She also has the gimmick of ending her sentences with desu, which, whatever, it's supposed to be cute, so it's fine. By the way, we should also get a playable bard in the Tales of franchise again. The lineage cannot end with Johnny from Tales of Destiny.
Was there anyone before him?
No, Johnny was the first bard playable character in the franchise, and never forget the one blast caliber that he has where sudden speakers come out of the ground and just destroy the enemy.
For real?
You gotta watch that one. It's in the Destiny's director's cut.
Oh my.
I'll link that to you later, but it's definitely an amazing mystic art, and I think I put that in my top 10 too.
Huh. Okay.
But
that's something.
it certainly is. So she tries to tag along with Reed because she feels that she'd be inspired by his actions to write poems. But Reed shrugs her off, saying that he wouldn't be that interesting at the end of the day. And that was a nice line to remind me of, or to remind the viewers of how he views himself as a person. And it's really one of the reasons why he's one of the top main protagonists in the series. He's just a guy who's just there doing what he wants to do for fun, and he doesn't consider his life interesting. He's just an average hunter. And it's kind of why like his growth in Eternia became such a highlight for myself personally.
So he's not like, the son of some noble and whatever. Sort of deal.
He's not the type of character to do like, oh, I'm ready to go out on an adventure to stop this from happening. And he's just really a guy that wants to keep life simple. But at the same time, he also knows when to do what's right if the task requires for it. So you can't really... it's not something innate in him, but he sort of gets dragged along in the journey by his more hero-type friend, Farah, which we'll be talking about more later here. So, in exchange for saving him, Karina informs Reed about the cursed swamp that is around the area and that a monster known as the Death Crab lives there to eat other humans, and how it baits victims with smaller monsters. In classic anime form, just as she was explaining this, we see Farah about to fall for this bait, and essentially Karina just leaves Reed, who heads back toward Keel and Meredy. But not before Keel and Meredy share a moment and have a flashback about her first seeing Keel and how she informed him of the Grand Fall. So, to bring people up to speed, this relationship between Keel and Meredy is kind of similar to how Hubert's and Pascal's were in Tales of Graces, to give a bit of a frame of reference. But Meredy is much more foreign and a little bit more just innocently into Keel, while Keel is a little bit more like doesn't really know how to respond as the intellectual.
Interesting. So that's why there's I see there's like a bit of a following for Keel and Meredy too, like in the Japanese side of the fandom.
Yeah, it does follow that very classic relationship trope that we see with the intellectual and the one who's very innocent. But it does go a couple steps further with the relationship between Hubert and Pascal compared to Meredy and Keel, but it's still very classic, which is why it does have its following.
I see.
So we're then back to Farah, who is baited by the one crab she was chasing, and is then ambushed by a swarm. She doesn't back down as she starts to defeat the crabs, including a palm strike to the ground, which does make me happy personally because I love it when anime adaptations of any video game would visualize their skills, and the Tales series doesn't shy away from said skills in their adaptations. Even to this day, I think we still see those skills visualized in Zestiria the Cross, and going before that, I think we saw some in Symphonia as well, even though I haven't watched much of both of those shows. And it's overall some fun fan service, and we'll be getting a lot of that throughout this Eternia show here. So, her advantage over these crabs were cut short when the death crab suddenly reveals itself to Farah, who was in a bit of a shock. She continues to fight off the death crab with some more arts like Talon Storm, and Swallow Dance. And honestly, I just like how Farah's palm strikes are just magical energy beams that she can shoot from her hands, which is not how it is in the game. It's just like a simple thrust forward. But I don't know, whatever. It's early 2000s, early 90s, or late 90s anime, so I still kind of dig it.
Simple or something.
Gotta keep it within the budget.
Yeah.
So after performing all those arts, she starts to tire out because of her lack of food. We then see our second close call in the episode as Reed chops off the crab's claw with a huge demon fang. Like, this was a pretty standard demon fang, but it's large in comparison to the demon fangs that you can do in the games, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So the song that plays next is a very classic anime song, as Quickie bounces around but doesn't really do much. And for those who don't know who Quickie is the token blue mascot that follows Meredy around. There really isn't nothing else with the creature. So then Meredy decides to summon the Cremo Undini, and Keel summons his Cremo, Sylph, and Ifrit. I do want to comment on the animations for the Cremo summoning, because you know how anime shows would reuse animations for particular attacks? You kind of see that in Sailor Moon and all that. This is the exact same thing in this show, but it's with the Cremo summoning. And whether you like it or not, it's still just a bit of a charm that this game has, being a product of its time. So there's also a cool thing about these summoning sequences as well, because both Meredy and Keel speak Melnyx to summon them, which is very much true to the game's lore. So I really do like that added touch to what they're doing during those summoning sequences.
I see.
So
I couldn't really appreciate that part so much.
That's all right. I mean, I guess it's just more so like for those who have played the game, they're like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. But for those who are just like watching, it's like, why are they saying it like that? So Meredy tries to use Aqua Edge, which isn't something that she can learn in the game, but she finds out that she can barely damage the crabs, which Undini clarifies because they're water elemental enemies. And I think you have something to say about how beautiful Undini's design is in the anime, right, Slip? Care to describe it? Or describe your reaction to it?
No comment.
Aw, really? Okay. Well, I guess to bring people up to speed, it does kind of look very jarring and out of place, so I definitely recommend looking up a screenshot of how Undini looks like in the Eternia anime. I think it's still a part of its charm, but it's kind of cool that the game, the anime does take cues from the game, where it's like, oh, you can't do water attacks against water enemies, which should be obvious, but not a lot of anime adaptations do follow up from games during that time. Like, I'm particularly looking at Pokemon, Pikachu beating Geodude and Onix. Yeah, no, none of that. We ain't getting that in this show here, thankfully. Yeah. So Keel follows up with his own Cremo attacks after both Sylph and Ifrit bicker a little bit, usual anime childish bickering. But Sylph does a Windblade and Ifrit does a Burning Break to clean up the rest of the mooks. And Reed follows up with a gigantic Tiger Blade. Like, geez, like if you thought the Demon Fang was huge, the Tiger Blade was just as gigantic, as the shockwaves from the Tiger Blade was enough to kill the entire crab, like the huge death crab there.
Wow, that's, very overpowered right there.
Yeah, so all's well that ends well. Farah is seen eating as the rest of them watch, since they've already ate Reed's hunt, which they try to not let her know. And the piece was suddenly interrupted by our stalker from the start of the episode. She reveals herself to be a swordswoman by the name of Maroni Blue Carno, who's voiced by Megumi Hayashibata from Slayers, Evangelion, and Cowboy Bebop fame, and threatens to take Reed's life by striking first with her own variation of a demon fang. So much for that being a sacred art. But that aside, the episode freezes right before impact, as we have a classic closing narration to advise us to tune in next time. Again, classic anime stuff, gotta love it. And then the credits roll, accompanied by the song I Love You to Touch Me, also sung by Masami Okui, and that is the end of episode 1 for the Tales of Eternia Anime. So, overall thoughts. Slip, what did you think about the episode when you initially watched it? And I know it kind of goes in line with what you said before we went into the recap, but specifically for this episode, what did you think overall?
In terms of the story, it doesn't really like shine so much, but I think it's like um it does the job basically.
It
It
does the
does the
job.
job.
What kind of job out of curiosity?
Whatever the anime set out to do, like tell. I mean, it tells a story, and as a person who is just very baseline familiar with Eternia, I didn't really have any difficulty like catching up with what the heck is going on. It's just like it's not like a golden standard for storytelling, but hey, I can follow it fine. And though, like, based on what I'm familiar with regarding the character designs, I just had several bones to pick with how certain characters looked. Specifically, Keel, who looks like he aged maybe 3 times over when he crossed over from the video game to the anime.
Yeah, the character designs are definitely. I mean, Abby commented on that too. They're just they're a product of the times. It's clearly a subsidiary group of production IG that doesn't have too much experience, I guess. But it's also around the year 2000, so I can kind of forgive it for that. But yeah, comparing it to animes nowadays, it definitely doesn't stand up in terms of art. But I still have an appreciation for it back in that time frame.
Yeah, it just really gives off that very old anime feel, which I guess could be a good or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. But yeah, I do agree that it's very much like a product of its times, and it doesn't have its charms. I mean, like as usual, the voice acting is pretty good. I mean, the Eternia does have a pretty good voice cast, and like I guess if you don't, if you aren't a big fan of the art, there's at least the voice acting to look forward to.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, the voice cast, the Japanese voice act do embody their roles very well. And I particularly love Akira Ishida's performance for Reed Herschel. You may also know him as other characters such as Atherin from Gundam Seed Destiny. And he does a great job whenever he does perform as Reed in all Japanese appearances and whatnot. And I do also agree it is definitely a product of its time, but that's why I have a bit of a partiality to it, because I watched the Fantasia OVA first, and I thought it was okay, but a lot of people would argue that it expedited a lot of the major events of the game. But
As a person who was like exposed to Fantasia's plot mostly through the OVA, I thought it was pretty good actually. Like obviously it like skips around a lot, and there's some parts that that make much sense to someone who hasn't played the game. But yeah, I mean, maybe unpopular opinion here, but I found it to be okay also.
right, and I would need to sort of reevaluate my impression of the OVA and the game for when I eventually get to my Fantasia replay through. I don't know when that's going to be, but in terms of Eternia, I am happy that it is a bit of a side adventure, but a part of me kind of hopes that if Eternia were to have a comeback, I would like to see the side characters that they establish in this game, like Moroni, like Karina, and if ever we were to go back to the show to recap an additional episode, then we can learn more about what they have contributed to the anime's plot, but they don't really do much to the game's plot, which is something that I kind of like, because it incentivizes those who have played the game to sort of watch the show as well. And on the other side, it incentivizes those who haven't played the game and watching the show, they might want to pick up the game afterwards, because again, the release window between Eternia's game release and the anime are very close together.
Yeah, I agree.
And yeah, and this anime still has a special place in my heart, because it's old school fun, and I grew up with a lot of those old school anime, and I know it wouldn't hang well for anime fans in 2018, so proceed with caution. But overall, I thought it was a fine show. And if ever we are to recap the other episodes, we would be discussing as such. Alright, so next up on the topics here, we're going to be talking about a particular point in Tales of the Abyss's plot. And it's a point in the story that everybody has some very intriguing opinions about, especially if you consider when you first saw it, or if you saw it at a different time of your life. We are going to be talking about Akzeriuth. So, this will be a spoiler alert for those who have not played Tales of the Abyss. If you don't want to be spoiled on this particular part of the game, I urge you to stop listening to the show right now. To give people a bit of a reminder as to what occurred at Akzeriuth is that when the entire party was at Backlog, the entire party was going to go to Akzeriuth because they were infected by miasma. And during the time that they were there, Luke acquired his self-appointed title as a goodwill ambassador, or was it self-implied? Or no, I think it was given by the king at the place there. Yes, all right, thank you for reminding me there. But yes, the king gave him the title of goodwill ambassador, and Luke tried to keep that title on foot and held on to that as they went to Akzeriuth and was generally pissing out the party with his antics and saying, "I'm the goodwill ambassador, you better listen to me." So throughout that, they were establishing that, and when they finally got to Akzeriuth, the miasma was a lot worse than it seemed initially, and as they went deeper into the mines, the party was tending to the sick people along the way, which left us with Van, Ion, and Luke. And as they went further down into the mines there, they actually found a bit of an odd structure, which we later learned was one of the gates for the cliff off, if I recall correctly. And essentially, it was opened up, and Van forced Luke to use his seventh phonon by using a term foolish replica Luke. And this caused an entire disaster to occur in Akzeriuth, and everything crashes. Everybody in Akzeriuth dies, including the poor little boy, John. Poor John sinking into the miasma. I can't believe the game took the time to even allow that to happen, but that occurred, and everybody decides to hate on Luke, essentially. Except for Ion, because Ion's a nice guy, but overall, that later turns into the whole replica reveal once they get into Yulia City. And that's basically like the thing with Akzeriuth, because there seems to be a bit of two sides about this, but Slip, I kind of want to hear what you think about the whole Akzeriuth thing, because you kind of went into it when we talked about highlights last time.
Alright. Akzeriuth is indeed a very polarizing topic, but I think it people, I feel in general, it does a very good job of putting the player into Luke's shoes, because some people end up internalizing it and Luke's point of view, because what it looks to Luke at that time is that everyone was blaming him, because that's the one that prompted his whole it's not my fault, almost sadly kind of meme like line, even in the Japanese side of the fandom. But what do they call this? But when you look at it, the party actually didn't really blame Luke at the time. It's just when he raised the issue, hey, do you think are you saying it's my fault? One thing I remembered or realized when I watched a playthrough of it on YouTube, it's, oh boy, the party didn't actually say anything after that.
Yes.
And Luke took their silence, I think, as a yes. Like a very what do you call this? A very damning yes, and that's when he started going. Yeah, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. That's when everyone like got pissed or sick of him. I guess at that point, and people just I wouldn't say hating, but they just I guess for me the word here is like they didn't know how to react to the thing because I guess they were thinking something like Luke does have some sort of fault in it, but at the same time, it's not really completely his fault too because Van manipulated him into like destroying Akzeriuth. It's not completely right to say that it's Luke's fault, but at the same time, it would be kind of lying if if you were to say that it wasn't his fault because
I, there,
there's
there's a lot. Go
yeah
on.
because at the end of the day too, it's kind of hard to say also that it's just Luke and Van who has something to answer for in this scene because if you come to think of it, each of them kind of have some sort of hand in the debacle in the first place. Like when you think of it, like Natalia knew that Van and Luke were like plotting something, but she didn't say anything. Um, Jade kind of figured out most of the plot beforehand already, but he didn't say anything either.
Yep.
And then,
But that's Jade.
yeah, yeah, but that's Jade. Oh, welcome back, Abby.
Oh yeah.
um, so like when I checked the scene again, the only person who like blamed him directly was actually Ash. But I guess his whole blaming thing kind of left more of an impression on us because that kind of followed into the whole replica reveal. At the end of the day, I think the right or wrong thing is just really up to the player's interpretation of the scene. But anyway, yeah. I could go about this forever, but yeah, what do you guys think?
Take the floor, Abby.
All right. Okay, I'm back. Actually, if you start Abyss in general, like if, for example, you know nothing about the latter half of the game, Luke is a really undesirable character. Like I really disliked him at first. He was pompous. He was this bratty little rich kid who was really selfish with everything. But then, since you're the player, you actually get to see everything that's happening all around us, like the whole replica thing. Like if you're if you've been playing the game, deep down it's not his fault. Like for me personally, it's really not his fault because um, from what
Yeah.
it looked like he was orchestrated into doing this. He personality wise, he's a really bad character, but I guess, and the Akzeriuth thing is the icing on the cake. That means it really drives all the people around him to hate him. Like I think that was the purpose of that part, and it was more of like a turning point instead of
Yeah.
just adding fuel to the fire for him to actually realize that damn, I'm a dislikable person. Like I really have problems. So I guess the Akzeriuth scene really helped. Although, personally, deep down, it's not his fault. Like,
Um,
especially since knowing he's a replica, it's his personality. He was driven to actually do that. He had this really blind loyalty towards Van, which you'll later find out is bullshit. But, um, uh, but yeah, it's all really up to the player. But personally, for me, it's really not his fault. Maybe he had like a 30% fault in it, but not the entirety of it, so to speak.
Akzeriuth. I every single time I'm reminded of it and how I try to like remind myself as to how I perceived the scene back when I was younger, back and to now when I replayed the game a couple years ago. I remembered when I was younger and I had all that reactions and responses that Abby mentioned. It was that Luke was designed to be that character, to be, oh, you're supposed to naturally hate him because of his behavior and how he's very much the spoiled rich kid that we all, as you mentioned, is a very undesirable character to be. And though he does have his moments of being nice, like I recall just him trying to protect Mew, him trying to protect Ion, like there were still hints of it there, but I guess you could say it's a slow build into how he ultimately turns himself for the better at the end.
In my opinion, it's more like Luke was actually he's really nice at heart, but he just really doesn't know how to express it very well. I think maybe part of him being quite sheltered and stuff, so he kind of becomes a little tsundere about it.
Yeah, and to build to that further, it's because I feel as though how the other characters know him. Like, I guess I can forgive Tyr at most for her response to it, but the rest of the characters, when they suddenly turned on Luke at Akzeriuth on the Tartarus, it just felt very stilted for me because Jade,
Really?
as you mentioned, Slip. Yeah, I'll elaborate
Alright,
on this. Jade,
alright.
as you mentioned, Slip. He knew everything, and like he basically, it's like as if he was going through the plot with the script in his hand, and a part of that is because of how much Van was much of a father figure to Luke, and of how much that Jade had this feeling that Luke was a replica. It kind of felt like there could have been a way for him to be a little bit more lighter on Luke that way, but at the same time, I could understand it being a very humanistic moment where everybody was just flipping out because they were all angry.
Yes.
But something could have been prevented there, and the
Um.
guy,
Yeah.
guy
Alright. Go
being
ahead.
the best. Go on.
No. On my end, it's just I kind of viewed Axarius as like a very high stress situation. It wasn't only Luke that's kind of stressed. The rest of the party is also stressed out by the situation. So I mean, I wouldn't say it's stilted, but it's like a good showcase of how this cast is kind of flawed and human in the sense of hey, they're not perfect all the time and they say some really well, frankly, I guess to the player's view like stupid stuff and Axarius is this type of scene.
Yeah, and it does lead to that whole flawed moment there for all the characters, and that's kind of like when I played through it the second time, I felt that all the characters felt very out of place. Like all characterization that was established prior to just was thrown out the window just to sort of hate on Luke. And
I wouldn't really say that because like I think it's mostly hindsight too because each of them like kind of had a reason why they said those things in a very stressful situation.
I mean, to begin with, Luke wasn't really a desirable character at the start of the game. Like, for example, in real life, if you have this one person in your group of friends who's baseline annoying, there are people like that. So when shit happens, you tend to lash out on that person. I think Xeriot was similar to that.
Yeah, because I think Luke was all of them at that point in time. They weren't blaming Luke at first. They were all like, "Hey, let's try to get out of this really very bad situation because we're in this place where we don't know shit what's going on and but we have to go back up like because we can't stay here forever." That's what the party was focused on, and then Luke just suddenly goes, "Do you think it's my fault?" That sort of deal, and then that just kind of distracts from their purpose, and they didn't know what to answer Luke, and yeah, yeah, I'm basically saying that there's something to what Abby said, because at that point Luke was kind of being annoying to them in that sense, and then yeah, I guess everyone just lashed out for their own personal reasons. Like for I guess for Tyr, part of it is like disappointment because she was like starting to because Luke was kind of being annoying on the way to Axarius about the whole ambassador thing. But before that, Tyr was like trying to be understanding because of the whole memory thing. And then there's Jade, who was like, I'm walking out because Luke's attitude reminded him of how he was like back in the day about responsibility. And then I think, and I guess, yeah, I think it was admitted, he admitted that later on about Luke. And since I mentioned responsibility, one thing that I find a better question to ask rather than who is to blame about Axerius is, I think the better question to ask for me is, does Luke have some sort of responsibility towards Axerius? And my answer here is actually yes, he has some sort of responsibility to it. Like, I wouldn't like blame him per se, but responsibility wise, he has like I had a very good discussion about this with someone back in the day. Like, so there's a kid, and let's say it's like there's a someone in the gang, the sort of deal, and then he and there was a fight, and then he ended up like, okay, I forgot what I was gonna say, but um
Okay, I do want to say this about Exarius. At the moment that it occurred, I don't blame everybody for flipping out on Luke. Something that I can say prior to, when the party, they were all dismissing him for his very goodwill ambassador moments, he mentions, like, Luke flat out says that the only person that really cares about him was Van during that time. And with everybody else on edge about Van specifically in the party, well, I could say Tyr obviously because she had a whole assassination sent out for him, and there's Jade and Guy as well having particular sort of like means of not really trusting Van in a sense during the time, considering in hindsight what their backstories are with him, is just I there felt like there were like some ways like prior to that they could have kept a better eye on Luke during those times, especially when Van was in the general vicinity, because of how much he can be easily manipulated based on how Jade knows who Luke was as a replica, and Guy obviously taking care of him the most while Van wasn't there, if that kind of makes sense.
yeah. Oh, okay. I found the post. So basically, like, sorry if you don't mind me going back to the topic I mentioned earlier. So, basically, the situation here is like, based on this discussion I had with someone. So there was an underling like serving his boss, and the said underling wants to impress the said boss, and then the boss goes and tells the underling that, hey, there's a rival gang that we should teach them a lesson. And then the underling beats up the other gang, gets into a fight, but he gets, and then he runs away, but he gets arrested because someone had died. And then, um, what the said person told the police was he was told by the boss, and he didn't really mean to kill anyone, and just wanted to, to please his boss. But the police said like, yes, you were told to do so by your boss, but you were the one who did it, and as a consequence you've killed someone. So like, even if they're not gonna charge him for premeditated murder, he's still going to be charged for like um accidental murder, that sort of deal.
Yeah,
Even if the intention wasn't there, like he still did something. So there's like some sort of responsibility towards that.
yeah, and I'm not arguing Luke having responsibility for that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Like Luke can have responsibility for it
Yes.
afterwards and during. I just felt like the rest of the party prior to Xerius could have a closer eye on Luke, especially considering what they perceive Luke may potentially be without being too sure about who he is. Like they still try to keep an eye on him about if he's alone at certain places because something might happen. Because he's very easily manipulated. He's easily convinced about a lot of things. He's easily impressionable. Like that one moment that occurred when he killed that one soldier on the Tartarus, like an actual human being. He flipped the heck out. And that was a fine moment because that would establish like Luke's shelteredness sort of being exposed when he's met with a very serious scenario. That was another very good implementation of gameplay and story, as when you are playing as Luke fighting that soldier, he just starts to slow down and you can't perform any arts. So when that moment happened, part of me kind of wondered like, wouldn't that be a bit of a big indicator to sort of keep a closer eye on Luke, even though he sort of decided to fight afterwards?
But I think that that scene was kind of like a long while back. Like that was back in the Tartarus, wasn't it? Correct me if I'm
That
wrong.
that was back on the Tartarus, yes.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I'm not sure about keeping an eye on Luke, but I think everyone was like doing their own thing when they got to Xerius because Luke wasn't doing a good job of
Being an ambassador or a leader.
handling. Like, yes, yeah, yeah. I remember that part where everyone just goes off and Luke just left to his own devices.
Yeah, and
I guess at that point, like I think no one really knew what Van was plotting at that time because like Jade, all he knows slash suspects is that Luke is a replica, but so it's like, so what? I mean, if he says anything to that effect, he's gonna have to go through like a really complicated explanation as to why he knows. Because, but yeah, I'm not saying that Jade is correct for doing that, because um honestly, like a good bit of the game's maybe problems might have been solved if what do
they
you
can
call this,
communicate.
if he said something
Yes.
earlier.
And that was a big flaw that I found overall. Like when the famous line, "It's nothing." It's just they throw that around. They threw that around a lot in Abyss. I found that kind of felt like a little bit of a, well, if you had said something sooner, like at least try to communicate something a little bit more during the time, it might have like stopped a particular event. But I, c- I can definitely see,
Yeah.
everybody flipping out on Luke, on Xerius. That's fine if they can have like that moment of anger. And prior
Yeah.
to
I think
it just needed some form of more communication
yeah.
outside of just there could even be some ways to sort of like keep it secretive too, while still keeping that secret, but saying, hey, maybe this is not a good idea, we shouldn't do this at this time. But I guess a part of me can kind of see how people may not suspect Van too much either, because of how much of a loyal, like how much of a higher ranking person he is, especially considering how he protected Arietta at this time. But this was also at a time when the god generals were still assaulting the party too, so wouldn't there be some form of like suspicion around Van, even though it seems like he's supposed to be the good guy, but everybody else in his team seems to be assaulting the party for their own reasons?
I'm not sure really how to like, because no, I think the core part for like the first third of Abyss really is no one suspects Van except probably the player. But like inverse, I don't think anyone really suspected him for his like true goals, that sort of deal. And I this is going a bit on a tangent, but I still maintain that Axarius would have kind of gone on differently if Luke just like admitted he had some sort of responsibility in the situation instead of going like it's not my fault the whole time. Because I think the party's main issue, like as I said earlier, is that Luke didn't take responsibility at that time, which I kind of also understand because Luke wasn't also like thinking straight in that scene. Like
The scene when
his
everybody was confronting him after Exarius sank or before?
or no, when he started like raising those stupid questions, like saying, "Are you saying it's my fault?" and then going afterwards and saying,
Yeah,
"It's not my
so
fault. It's
during
not my
that moment
fault."
when they were all validating what he did.
Um, I think their problem was with his attitude rather than him like blowing up Axarius. But I guess to most people, it looks like they had a problem with what do you call this? Oh yeah, it looks like they had a problem with Luke blowing up Axarius when in fact it was his attitude after blowing up Axarius that had them all uppity about what he did.
I sorry, can you repeat that last part again? I sort of
Wait, no,
had to respond.
sorry, sorry, no, it's fine. So basically, what I want to say, like what I said back in the day, is that I don't think it's what Luke did that made the party say all those really horrible things. What made them say it was because of his attitude, like his denial of responsibility, and like because back in the Dio pass when they were like going to Xeriuth, he wanted everyone to treat him like an adult, like wanted to be taken seriously. But he was being childish, like after Xeriuth fell, and I guess everyone was just really sick of everything at that point, and like Abby said, he provided like a convenient point to lash out and ended up criticizing him.
I guess the big
Yeah.
thing for me is that I kind of wish that Luke had somebody who was more of an adult figure that wasn't Van during that time because he only had Van to attach to compared to
Oh
the rest of
yeah.
the party that were dismissive for his behavior, which is fine, but I kind of wish there was like somebody who took that responsibility and be like, "All right, this is Luke lashing out again. Okay, let's calm down, Luke. It's fine. Just relax." And I think Ion kind of played that a little bit, but not really, because Anna sort of just took Ion away
Yeah.
afterwards. But he needed somebody in that party who could have been more of a guy that could have prevented Exarius during that time because of how much he was dismissed by the rest of the team. It just felt like he was more. It explains why he was behaving that way in Exarius because Van was the only one who he trusted.
Yeah. At that point, like the only person he trusted was Van, so he didn't think that Van would have such harmful intentions towards him.
Yeah,
So
because he was a master manipulator.
because yeah, because Luke didn't trust anyone else. Like I guess he trusts Guy, but it was his and Master Van's secret. So yeah, everything just turned out to be a
A part of
disaster.
me kind of wonders though, because
Basically.
Guy wanted to follow Van, because Guy wanted that resurrection or bringing Hod back to sort of like, what did he actually want Hod back? I can't remember, but I knew that he wanted to trust in Van, but then at some point he stopped following Van's vision when he realized what he was going to do at the end of the day.
Oh yes. I think like at that point in time, maybe Guy was still, I think, considering his loyalties because Van did like offer. He doesn't know what Van is planning in full, I guess, but um, I think it was heavily implied in the game that he like meets up with Van every now and then, and they talk revenge and stuff. And it's only like way later on that Guy manages to let go of his revenge plot. I
Yeah,
think.
that was actually like further ahead of the game once they well, overall like his feelings for Luke as a friend overcame that one moment in Grand Kokma when his that curse phone slot, whatever it was called, that sync caused to Guy suddenly reacted and wanted to, and Guy suddenly wanted to kill Luke at that moment. But that was due to that curse taking over. But he still has the mindset to sort of like have be Luke's friend during that time. I
Yeah, because I think Guy was the first to like regret what he said back then because he does like end up coming back and waiting for them in the place.
yes,
And
which was a very nice moment. Guy does is the first person to try to go back to Luke, which I still appreciated out of everything that occurred after Akzeriuth. I
yeah, because everyone was really kind of savage
yes,
towards Luke. No, afterwards, like not Anis was especially savage
and then
towards Luke.
to build up on Annis though, what do you think about the responses of when like people would bring up how Annis caused Ion to die?
Oh
Because
my gosh.
the party wasn't as hard on Annis as they were on Luke during that time. You know what I mean?
I think part of it's also like the party kind of grew up a bit too. And the other major thing, like if you're gonna compare and contrast like the Axarius scene and Anis, is that Anis was quicker to like take responsibility for like what she did. Like she acknowledged that it's her fault that Ian died, sort of deal. Like unlike Luke who was like, it's not my fault, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. I think that was one main thing. And I'd also like to think that like, after Luke, they knew how to handle the situation better.
All right. Yeah, that sounds like a fair response to that. Uh,
But yeah, what did you think about that?
I mean, Akzeriuth overall, I just feel like if you're playing through it the first time, then you're going to have that impression of Luke, that negative impression of that spoiled behavior and that overtake. You are basically that identity from player to character, that whole blank slate that you mentioned before Slip. It now transfers over to everybody else who was disappointed with Luke. And then how that transfers over to Anis, that also, I suppose, translates to how the party has grown and accepted that, especially considering what they have gone through with Luke. And if I recall correctly, I think Luke was the first one to actually comfort Anis during that moment when she was by herself in Dot. By the way, shouts to the amount of time that you
Oh
had to go back to
yes.
Dot.
Oh.
But overall, I guess in the initial playthrough, you're going to have that impression of not appreciating what Luke has done, but in the second playthrough, it does raise those questions about why weren't the party there prior to. But I guess some of the reasons that we've talked about tonight is some form of allowing that to be a pass for them, because they're just trying to focus on Luke's negative behavior and his attitude as opposed to what he was doing.
I'm not sure I could completely agree with that, but it's more like on my end. Um, I personally, I mean, even though like I acknowledge that parts of Exterius were a little cringy, I guess, depending on how you view it. I still wouldn't like want to change it for what it is, or what they call this. Mostly because how do I explain this? Like, it displayed their flaws very. I just like the way their flaws were kind of done for Abyss in general, and like Axarius is like one of those scenes for me that just remind me that like Abyss kind of has this effect on people. That sort of deal.
I guess for myself is that Luke was still considered around 7 years old, like the mindset of 7 years old during that time. So the manipulation was very real, but prior to Akzeriuth. Like, again, like I said, I don't mind the entire party flipping out on Luke as a result of it, but prior to the build-up, I don't know, it still sort of like rubs me the wrong way. But overall, I think we both established that at the end of the day, we all have our own impressions about Akzeriuth because of how polarizing it is if you play through Abyss once or twice. So, yep, that's Akzeriuth.
Yep, sounds about right.
All right, so with that said, feel free to comment about Akzeriuth in wherever this is posted. To those who are curious, I'm curious to hear everybody's responses.
Yeah.
Just as a premonition as well, the last time I did a full playthrough of Tales of the Abyss was 4 years ago, so my memories of that game may be a little bit hazy, but I still remembered like my overall impressions of it after the second or third playthrough, since I played through Abyss the first time that I played it way back when it came out in 2006. So that's a happy 12th anniversary to the localization on the PS2. So I'm kind of glad that we were able to talk about Akzeriuth at the end of the day. So,
Same.
all right. So with that said, feel free to follow Abyssal Chronicles at Abyssal C. Check out the website at www.abyssalchronicles.com with the latest in Tales of news and information. You could feel free to follow me on Twitter at PanbanRichard, even though I'm kind of in a bit of a silent period at this time. Any plugs on your end, Slip?
Just the usual. I'm on Tumblr and Twitter on DimensionSlip, and still holding sales as usual, trying to get space in my room, but kind of failing in that regard because I just end up getting more stuff. But anyway.
And
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
That's it on my end.
All right, and you can also follow Abby at Abby745 on Twitter as well. So, with that said, to those who have tuned in, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, take care.